Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I am joined today by my co host, Anthony Marquetta. Wonderful, excellent, uh, of many qualities. And I'm also joined with Hari Seldon, the great psychohistorian, who is enjoying his time here to discuss the SCP Foundation and various other topics of interest. How are you doing today, Anthony?
Um, well, I'm never been had a bad day, so
And how about you, Mr. Seldon?
fine, I guess.
I'm doing quite well, although most people expect me to be here to discuss the other foundation.
No, that's boring. Nerd talk. But no, no. So for those who aren't aware, the SEB Foundation is a secret organization dedicated to protecting the world against supernatural threats. To
Hold
ensure
on, are we doing the kayfabe?
what?
Are we doing kayfabe?
You know what? We can absolutely do it kayfabe if you want.
Sure.
All right. Hold on. Let me get into character. The Security Commission of Prague is the SCP Foundation in the Pinkerton's Ghost universe is an organization that mostly, well, it doesn't kill as much as I might want them to. They think they can reform some of the monsters despite their spiritual devastations. But
I would
sad,
like to note that the Security Commission has officially never identified itself as identical with the SCP Foundation.
yes, it
Uh,
has. Unfortunately, if I were to let that ride, it is a lie. However, in official scripts, it has all been changed to the Security Commission of Prague. Sadly,
ah,
so like out of universe. The reason why I can't use the SCP Foundation is because of the copyright. We own Pinkerton's Ghosts. The SCP Foundation is free to be worked on by everyone else, but you can't steal it for yourself. Um, there's certain copyright BS that was very hard to understand. So they are legally distinct entities.
that's what I was trying
No
to say.
copyrights were harmed in the making of this podcast.
You may call off your lawyers, and I
That's what I
will.
was trying to say. Perhaps I was unclear.
Uh, no, but sadly, there is some audio files that reference the SCP Foundation in ways more explicit than I care to admit to. Oh well. But no, I can't do kayfabe. Not without this little preparation, Anthony. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I
I'm
was
sorry. Keep going.
anyway.
That was
But
an idea.
it's a great idea. Uh, but no, they protect the world. Their motto is secure, contain, protect. Their desire is to keep the world as normal as possible. There are some things that have been reduced, some things that have been made normal, and by the grace of God, and nuclear weapons sometimes. And the SCP 2000, the mass cloning vats in the bottom of Yellowstone National Park, the world keeps on turning in a way we can recognize. Is that a good summary, Harry Seldon?
I think that's as decent as you're going to get.
It's true.
Uh, the other, the other summary I was going to include would be a word from the administrator, which has an interesting little piece of background in the outside of the fiction of the SCP Foundation.
Ooh, go for it.
So back in 2018, not 2018, back in 2007, the SCP Foundation had just moved on from being a vague collection of copy pastas on 4chan's Paranormal X board into a distinct website on Edit This. Unfortunately, Edit This, which was a proto wiki, was a very small website and was going to shut down abruptly. and nobody there at the time on the IRC chats and in the site itself had any idea what to do. So one of the editors decided unilaterally to make a new account and call that account the administrator. And he simply declared, we are moving to Wikidot. Here are the CSS templates. I've added in most of the main catalog. Here's how to put discussion pages and rating modules in. This is where we're going. And he didn't claim to be the person who founded the SCP Foundation site. He just didn't claim not to be, and he spoke with sufficient authority that nobody questioned it until after the move was already done.
Nice.
But the part that really astounded me was the fact that after that, he wrote one SCP, and he wrote a simple note, a word from the administrator as a sort of introduction to the SCP Foundation, and then he wrote nothing else. He decided that he didn't want to abuse the name recognition that having this name would give him, and so he never told anybody who he was until long after he'd stopped editing the site and long after it didn't matter anymore. So he only had this as his out-of-universe legacy. And I thought that power corrupts even made-up silly internet power. And I thought that was admirable to not abuse that. So his introduction. Mankind in its present state has been around for 250,000 years, yet only the last 4,000 have been of any significance. So what did we do for nearly 250,000 years? We huddled in caves and around small fires, fearful of the things that we didn't understand. It was more than explaining why the sun came up. It was the mystery of enormous birds with the heads of men and rocks that came to life. So we called them gods and demons and begged them to spare us and prayed for salvation. In time, their numbers dwindled and our numbers rose. The world began to make more sense when there were less things to fear. Yet, the unexplained can never truly go away, as if the universe demands the absurd and impossible. Mankind must not go back to hiding in fear. No one else will protect us, we must stand up for ourselves. While the rest of mankind dwell in the light, we must stand in the darkness to combat it, contain it, and shield it from the eyes of the public, so that others may live in a sane, normal world. We secure, we contain, we protect. And
Nice.
that's about as good as you're going to get of a look on the SCP Foundation, I think.
Yeah. And it's there's some things that you can say about it for this or that. Some people like to say, oh well, they killed this, they killed that, or they like to call them oppressive or this. But it's like they're keeping at bay a monster that basically teleports in to snap people's necks whenever people aren't looking at it, or several apocalypses that can go off at the same time, or something as simple as a giant puddle of gloop that lets you feel less depressed when it's around. There's some handle it to it, but quite frankly, that's perfectly acceptable means to do it, because most people, and I know this from personal experience in the real world, cannot handle non-normalcy. They cannot handle the weird. They cannot handle even a overlong line at Starbucks. Do you think they would be able to handle the giant vampire mother thing that is currently under most of the Balkans? No. I don't think so.
And it should be noted, as a work of fiction, the SCP Foundation has an interesting format in which everything is written up, or should be written up, as containment procedures. Everything is written as in a single snapshot of time, effectively. Most stories, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This, you start out by describing how the thing you were talking about is to be contained, and then you describe what the thing you are containing is. And it makes for very interesting it makes for very interesting stories, and it's a difficult format to write in.
Yes.
Uh, and I've noticed in recent years, a lot of people have sort of started disregarding the format more and more, because my guess is it is hard to tell a story in essentially one picture in one moment of time.
Yep. And it's we can sort of talk about it. Like I came in, oh my goodness, so long ago, back when it was just like 1,000 of them, and a whole lot of other things as well. And most people can't really understand just how much things have changed compared to how it was when I started or you started, probably. Um,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not just you know these stories, but it was like also a whole bunch of trash things, like everybody's self-insert robot, that sort of thing. Um, some of the old ones like Cassie and stuff like that are still around. For some reason, they got rid of the Skull of the White Div, which I absolutely hate because now there's almost no just like random murder things. Like even SCP-173 is just like safely contained. It's like no, this is a weird skull. It sends everyone into a murder rage. Why? I don't know. You know, it's
Ye-
like it was actually fairly well contained when we picked it up. You know,
yep.
whoops.
And there's a shift, and I think some many of the tropes, for better or worse, that were common back then, people sort of the pendulum swung the other way.
Yeah,
Uh, People decided, well, if we're not going to have a dozen or 100 random murder things, which I think there might have been at peak, there were lots of just random things that would kill you and weren't otherwise that special.
yep. And it's
But they
keep going.
they switched from that to none,
Yep,
and yeah, I mean that's the nature of a, something that's collaborative fiction.
yep,
In that you don't have full control over what's going to happen next. In fact, this is an instance. There's a rule in the SCP Foundation. Simply, there is no canon,
yep.
and that at one point, maybe 2007, maybe 2008, people were trying to incorporate all of this into a single world, but there quickly became too many SCPs, and there were too many conflicting pieces. There were too many things that would conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Uh, there is an SCP now that is Yellowstone National Park. Why is that an SCP? Well, it turns out somehow the Foundation had just never heard of it. Not a single person in the entire Foundation was aware of the existence of Yellowstone National Park until 2014 or so.
That's actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it's a neat concept for an SCP, because now you have the wonder. How in the world was that possible? How Who did this? Why?
Right.
They realized that Yellowstone was not unknown to the rest of the general public. It was specifically them. Coincidences had just mounted everywhere in the world, such that nobody mentioned Yellowstone in the presence of any agent or any database.
Yeah.
And that's a great concept. But I can definitely see, if you had an idea for that, and then there was one SCP that made one reference to Yellowstone National Park sometime years and years ago, and that meant you can't do your cool idea. I
Yep.
can understand how eventually you have to give up the concept of having everything be in a single universe.
Yep. It's
Yeah, you gotta keep a tight control on that sort of thing, or it falls apart very quickly. Uh, like you see it a lot. Things grow and grow and grow, and then they get so big that speak of multiple things being part of the same world doesn't really make any sense anymore. if you're not keeping a close eye on the lore, this is important. It happened like particularly what I'm thinking of is Star Wars. Uh,
Mm.
it happened both in the expanded universe era. Now I understand that the expanded universe and criticism of the expanded universe and criticism of Disney Star Wars are criticism of two entirely different things. To criticize the expanded universe is to criticize like a labor of love by people who were fans of the series and who just wanted to tell more stories, and to criticize Disney Star Wars is to criticize soulless cash grabs by greedy executives. So it's just like a different type. With that said, um, the expanded universe was very flawed in its own way. And one of the reasons it was flawed is that when you get like so many different pans in the same pot, and then you're trying to get them into the same universe, you start to see disconnects between how people view the stories.
Yep. And it's and the thing is with all the Star Wars stuff, people forget that George Lucas was just like, oh, is that Michael Straczynski, the Babylon 5 guy? Yeah, he can write as many Star Wars novels as he wants. Like it was kind of like that. Like there wasn't as much control over what was being done. It was just a vague idea that all the authors were mostly reading their own books. Reading the books, so they had a vague idea of what was going on before or after, or at least the good ones did. Um, and so you had this basic movement of where things were going, and then they would say, "Well, we want the Yuzon Vong crisis." Like it was a lot less directed than people realize. But the problem with high direction on like from on high is that you get, if it's a bad idea, there's no correcting it. Like some of the Yuzon Vong stuff was just bad, but the Disney stuff is worse. And it's the same way with some of the SCP stuff. While some of the admins are pretty dedicated to its protection, like a lot of this stuff is just kind of bad. Like it's just unreadable. Like the Skull of the White Div was replaced by a cautionary tale, like it was barely a containment procedure about this SCP agent who had maybe stolen some secrets and was on the run. And it's like, no, the Foundation watches you wherever you go. And it's like, that's it. That's the whole SCP. It's like you replace the Skull of the White Div with a 1984 reference. You know how many 1984 references are already in the SCP Foundation? It's passively in there all the time. Like you can't have um, this sort of thing without having a passive surveillance state across the whole world looking for supernatural events. Like it just was unnecessary, entirely unnecessary.
There are loads of SCPs whose containment procedures amount to, we can't contain this particular SCP for whatever reason, but we can contain the knowledge of it. So here is how we are monitoring worldwide information for any reference to SCP XXX, and here is how we are administering amnestics to anyone who happens to find out about or think about it. This was already pretty well established, but again, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
From a website point of view, there's only so, if you have too much direction from on high, you're going to, the project is going to just stall out. And if you have little direction from on high, then what happens now is you'll have too much, and it'll contradict itself too much to be in the same universe. And so, yeah, you have to pick between one or the other, and they pick the latter. So,
Yep.
for better or worse, that's where we are now.
Yep. And it just kind of bothers me about where it's at on a lot of these things. Just because it's like, well, this sort of this takes me out of it. Like this like Pinkerton's Ghosts will not have an SCP style lore explosion, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though I'm inviting other people to write short stories and perform them, I vet everything that comes through to see whether it falls a vague and loose canon. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to do a super sick werewolf fight thing, it's there. You can do it. I'm not going to play real hard and fast with the werewolf rules. All right, I will make sure that there's also spiritual sickness attached to werewolves, because, like I said in the live stream that I posted in the comments, Christian horror is the why of the werewolf, not the why is the werewolf, not in the actual horror of the werewolf itself. Werewolves aren't that scary the second you realize it's just the bipedal wolf. Same with vampires. They kind of once they're out in the light, they lose a lot of what makes them then, and they, like I'm going to preserve that. They're never going like Jim Donovan is never going to dissect a werewolf and figure out what makes it tick. No, they made some ancient pact in a ancient Roman ruin outside of like it's going to be something stupid and mysterious and whatever, but like it's never going to be, we just can't contain it. It's like, no, that's bullshit. Like, how many of these things do I have to read that's like, we don't have to contain it? It's like, no. Like, they almost outnumber the things that they do contain. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, this is a law of... go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, the problem is, every one of the problems that's currently on the site traces to some SCP that was particularly good.
Yep.
But then the imitations, and there's one I would like to show you. You've probably seen it, Ben. I don't know if you've seen it, Anthony.
Link it to me on Discord.
Oh, okay. Don't share my screen. Got it. But there's one that was.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yes. There was a contest going on to write an SCP in, I think, 147 words or fewer. It was a specific word count. It was aiming for brevity, and so someone decided to write an SCP with 0 words.
Brilliant.
And actually did make it work, and demonstrated an uncontainable SCP and how you deal with it. But the problem is, that idea was great. It was implemented amazingly. And then the people who have tried to copy it have not been able to copy it nearly so well.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Like, it's, I remember some of the ones for, what's that one guy who does a bunch of them? Demon, Maldraug, hold on, Hector. Oh my goodness. I keep forgetting they're already at 7,000.
I know.
Ooh.
It's spooky.
So, like, Series 8. I'm trying to find the, for some reason my search bar isn't working inside this thing. There we go. There we go. DJ Cactus's series. Demon Hector. Yes. And it's like Project Paradigm, Antediluvian Research. And there's some really good stuff on there. And it's actually a pretty decent story, to be fair to DJ Cactus. And they even have his own special, I'll link it, special, like, formatting and stuff like that. But if it wasn't for the fact that DJ Cactus was as good as he is, and he has no right to be this good, and as willing to just run through all the different SCP tropes, and basically he's writing catnip for SCPs, quite frankly, I wouldn't pay any attention to it. It's like, well, it's these four, like, it's these guys here, and they're all mysterious, and they're from this one canon that he's writing. And it's like, like, people don't understand the difference between being allowed and being worth reading. Like, most of these, like, especially in the recent times, are just not worth reading to me. and it bothers me quite a bit. Just because it's like, oh well, you don't have to, like them, but it's like, look at this. Special containment second Argus. What even is Argus? Connect. What is Connect? Risk class danger. Like they have all these different things. It's like, but it makes it more uniform. It's like I don't understand what's going on. Uh, here. But then, for this one, to be fair to it, it is actually contained. No Catholic may approach SCP 703 as it is the body of a saint, and it turns other people into, fanatical committees, um, and believe that it is the true and legitimate Pope. You know what? That's actually a pretty good story. That not story, a pretty good article. Just because it's like, oh, it's short to the point. Catholics. By the way, this is the front page article. I want to be clear. Like, this isn't me just typing in Catholic onto SCP Foundation. This is just what the featured SCP of the day is. So it's like, yeah, okay, it's a dead body that causes all Catholics that come within about 10 meters of it to be completely devoted to it. And there's other things connected to it, but quite frankly, that's just what I described would have been enough. And they're going to put it in a mechanical suit and retake the Holy See from its false pope. All right. And then,
Incidentally, are you showing anything? Because I don't see anything.
I'm not showing anything.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
I'm just playing a game on the side thing with a mysterious occult looking thing. But then it's like, it's got one of the spacefaring ones that I just kind of hate. I don't like the Ad Aspera series. Like, it's just like, it's in space. No, this is stupid. This is about Earth. This is about some scientists and their, detective like agents saving the world. I don't care what goes on in space. And you see how, like, I'm constantly talking about these canons that exist without with no explanation. Like, to describe what some of these are, it's the SCP Foundation in space. Yeah, and it's like more than that. It's not that there are bad SCPs in space. There's a really good one that's about these people going deeper into the galaxy and discovering that the Architect SCP, because it was left out in the open, is expanding the universe like it anomalously expands any building it's in. So you come across entire galaxies made of like cotton candy or lakes of vodka. Like it's one of those things where it's like, oh wow, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. But it's to make it more than it is, which is the best of a lot of mediocrity, just bothers me. There are some that I do find very good. If you want to, like the first 1,000 or so, are all very much, readable. As weird as it is to say 1,000 articles are basically readable, yeah.
Because back then, back in I think '08, I tried to get in, and at that time, you had to apply to get in, and you had to send a sample of writing and everything, and I didn't get in, and this was because the sample of writing I sent in was lousy, and they shouldn't have let me in, and didn't. And one way I was a sort of leading indicator that the site quality was going downhill was when I reapplied a couple years later with the same sample of writing, and they didn't require those anymore, and I just got in anyway.
Any of these yours?
What'd you say?
Any of these SCPs yours?
No.
Yeah.
No. But they had, even if there was no canon, even if there was only a vague group of people trying to keep the quality high. Even if there was nobody in charge, people did care about the quality of these things back during the first 1,000. And it's not to say that nobody cares now. It's not to say that there are
Right.
no good ones coming out now. But the focus on quality, the focus on maintaining a consistent sounding thing, is that's not there anymore. The focus has moved on quite a bit since then. And again, I'm not sure there's anything you could do about it.
Right. There isn't really. And quite frankly, it's not my project, not my monkeys. Uh,
Right.
there's not much we could do about it anyway. But the thing is to just sort of like look at it, examine it. What are the pitfalls? The pitfalls is that the giant, best written by committee set of stories on the internet. It's not like they're unreadable now, but they're not at the same spirit and quality than what they had at the start. And as Anthony, me, and Ken are planning out, the third season of Pinkerton's Ghosts, as I'm writing the Mother Morrow side series, I'm definitely worrying, about this stuff, how to keep up the pressure, how to keep up, the horror aspect of things, and not to lose the sort of detective horror of Pinkerton's Ghosts. Um, and I think that's a good lesson for a lot of creatives out there. Whatever you have will drift with time. I know that you've written a bit. Anthony's written a bit. I have thrown away tons of stories just because, they're not good, not good at all. And I was right to throw them away and no longer work on them. In the same way with a lot of other things that kind of gets out there. Um, Before the stream started, we were talking about uh, Gendy Kartovsky and the new Warriors Eternal Unicorn or whatever it's called. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's almost too good. But at the same time, Gendy Tartovsky is very much a creator who goes where his paychecks are. We don't like. I like Hotel Transylvania. Okay, it's kind of a show for babies, but Anthony doesn't like it. It's not worth
Not
him.
really.
Pardon for speaking for you. It's not really worth his time the same way as it is for an 8-year old. And that's the same creator as Samurai Jack and Primal. Uh, hmm.
To your point earlier about DJ Cactus, a trend that unfortunately I think he really started was the trend of making. Uh, so SCPs have always had some way of incorporating linear stories, and a lot of those times those stories are told in addendas, and the stories will consist of interview logs that reveal something neat about it, or they'll consist of acquisition logs which describe the story of how this thing was acquired, some way of putting it into linear time. But what DJ Cactus did, and again, he did it well, and I think most of his imitators didn't, was he started putting in large pieces of dialogue and other addendas and such before having the report. And as a result, you have SCPs in which you can't find where the containment procedures are. You can't find the
Yep.
report that's supposed to be generated until you get through 20 pages of story first. Uh, and I do sometimes laugh thinking about some poor Foundation scientist somewhere who there's an SCP, it's on the loose, and he desperately needs to find out what the containment procedures are, so he dials it up in the database, and he has to scroll through 20 pages of story first before he can get to the procedures. Uh, it's a it's something that I don't know. It's a problem I don't know how to solve. That of how do you resist the temptation to do one-off things that individually are great, but collectively tear down the uniqueness and the consistency of your universe.
Yep.
Because the whole unique part about this, compared to basically any other horror, was the fact that it was told in this very bureaucratic, very dry language in the form of these reports.
Yep.
And so the first person to break that finds a really neat effect. You're expecting one thing and you get another. But the next person to break that is just reducing how unique this format is, and
Yeah,
making.
it's a trap. I see it all the time.
Yep.
It happens in shows a lot. Shows that I like, even, they will do this, and what it will generally take the form of, and I'm going to use one of my favorite shows, Justified, as an example of this. They end one season of the show, it's a cop show, with the main character essentially calling in a hit on an enemy. Like, he alerts the Detroit Mafia that there is a guy who is there, and he uses the Detroit Mafia to kill him, and he doesn't turn them in. Now, this is a huge deal for a cop, right? A U.S. Marshal. This should be a monumental change in his character and the status quo of the show. The problem is, it was too big of a change, and the show could not possibly follow up on this in the way that the narrative really demanded. So season 5 ultimately was a lot of scrambling and backtracking as they tried to bring the main character sort of back from the edge of where he had already jumped, which is the problem. Like, it's not that he was on the ledge, he had jumped from the ledge.
He had called in the hit.
Right. So now they need to, like, scramble and overcome it, and season 5 is generally considered one of the weaker seasons of the show, and the show does recover and sort of ends on a good note in season 6, but they have to have a very sloppy season 5 to try and figure out what to do about this, because, like, you could have a show about this new version of the character, but it would be a completely different show than what they had seen. It wouldn't have been what the fans wanted, and it made for a fantastic individual episode, right? Like, that episode is great, one of the best episodes in the entire show. But they didn't have anywhere to go from there, so they had to dial it back. Death Note did this. They killed L, then didn't know what to do, then literally had to come up with, like, new detectives to serve as L, and nobody liked them, and it didn't really work. I don't know if that reference means anything to you.
Your Death Note?
Yeah.
Yes.
And, sorry, spoiler for, like, a decade-plus old show now. Like, what, almost 2 decades?
Amazingly, I only watched that for the first time a couple years ago, and I was almost totally unspoiled for it.
Oh, so was I when I saw it, but, you know, like, I don't feel too bad about blurting out twists. And it happened in the show Sherlock, which they have that whole big thing in the Reichenbach Fall where Sherlock fakes his death, and then the entire next episode they, like, scramble to basically undo as much of it as possible as quickly as they could. And it is very, very common. Like I said, 3 different circumstances, all 3 of which I would consider to be, at least at one time, good shows. And all of them, and some are more successful at, like, reversing it than others. Like, Justified, I would consider to have gotten back on track by the time season 5 ends. And honestly, even season 5 is not that bad, right? Like, it's a pretty good season of television, probably above average. Sherlock had a couple of good episodes in the time after the Reichenbach Fall, although it definitely fell off in quality a lot. And Death Note's whole second half is famously a mess. So, like, it varies in quality, but all of them, this was a flaw that all of them suffered from, that they did something shocking and big that nobody expected, and then they didn't know where to go from there.
Right. Although this is slightly different. This would be if in Sherlock, after he faked his death during the Reichenbach Falls, this would be as if you had a bunch of people writing episodes in which every other character was now dramatically faking their deaths.
Mhm.
You have another episode where
Amusing
Mycroft
idea.
fakes his, and then Dr. Watson fakes his, because people saw how good that episode was, and decided, well, we've got to do the same thing now.
Yep.
So that might be a closer analogy, and that's
That's an amusing idea.
There's a yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like this is the problem of having no overhead direction. The overhead direction is yeah, there's this organization that does this, 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 and there's some side organizations that do that and those and whatever. You know, have at it. You know, and it's like some of them are great. You know, some of them are absolute masterpieces. They usually choose a really good one in concept for the 1000 marker, like SCP 1000, Bigfoot, SCP 2000,
hmm
under Yellowstone National Park, SCP 3000. I think those are the Fae. SCP 4000, I can't remember. I know it was pretty interesting, but why can't I remember it? Oh yeah, sorry, 3000 was the giant snake. Uh, SCP 4000 was the Fae, uh, called Taboo, which was just a fantastic concept.
Yeah, but taking the whole idea that we call them the fair folk as a euphemism, and taking that to the logical extreme.
Yep. And then you had SCP 5000, which was Y, which is about a guy documenting the end of the world, which would be cool if we hadn't seen it before, but it's the best of the lot. SCP 6000 is. I can't even remember what this is, and I've listened to the Exploring series do a video. And SCP 7000 is a dude who's incredibly unlucky, uh, and so it causes other people to be lucky when he suffers, which is a fantastic idea, but it's entirely story. And I don't care.
hmm
That's what it
Yeah,
comes down to.
and what's amazing, the series that we were discussing, there is no antimemetics division.
Yep.
This was started back in 2015 rather,
Mm.
and at the time, the guy needed a non-existent SCP number for a certain central uh, SCP in his story. And so he picked 3125, which happens to be 5 to the 5th power, because the number 5 was very significant throughout that whole saga.
Yep.
And at the time, 3125 was way in the future. There weren't even 2000 SCPs yet, let alone 3000.
Yep.
He I don't think he expected to have to actually write an entry, because we weren't going to get there for so many years. But now we're adding 1,000 a year, and
Yeah.
obviously the quality is going to go down. There's just no way around it. And that's
Yep.
not to say that back in the day everything was high quality, because it wasn't. It was a different kind of low quality in many cases. The
Yeah.
low quality often consisted of self inserts, or it consisted of, let's say, needlessly killing D class for no reason,
Yep.
or
Which
it
is
consisted of
recognizable, if you get me.
yes. Uh, there were, for particularly bad SCPs, they used to have in-universe decommissionings where the self-inserts of some of the top editors would come in and kill the thing or destroy the thing, and that way it was sort of a hall of shame of, here's how not to write an SCP. It is so bad we had to kill it in universe.
Right.
But often that became as cringy as the thing that was being killed.
Yeah. And even though the editors are pretty good characters in and of themselves, and there's some great stories involving them, especially back when the world was young, in the end, it's like you can't, like, how do I want to put it? Like, the idea that there's a certain amount of quality that can be approved by the system still falls apart when you have to understand that people are probably going to look at whatever you do and do it poorly if they like it a lot. Which
Mm-hmm.
always gets stuck in my craw sometimes. Those new nerds.
I think a lot of what this comes down to, and I've noticed this in everything, is quality control and how important that is.
Yeah.
As good as the SCP, like conceptually, the idea behind the SCP Foundation Wiki, I think, is really fun and a really cool idea. But inevitably, it's going to degrade if you don't have some sort of quality control. And particularly, I don't want to belabor this point because you mentioned that we talk about it a lot, but it is important to mention, like, you need to have safeguards in place against convergence. Like, you need to. Otherwise, it will get converged. Like, there is no... And I'm referring, of course, to people who don't know, to SJW conversion, right? Convergence.
Yes.
I mean, right? Like, Pinkerton's Ghost is never going to get converged. First off, it is a very small operation.
I'll
Second
be
off,
very dead if it happens.
yes. Second off, though, is that there is extremely tight control from the top. Like, there is a lot of attention being paid to the quality of stories. And generally speaking, like, if somebody were to come in and try and sneak in SJW stuff, we would be very vigilant about it. All three of us, it helps that we're all on the same page on this particular subject. We're not all on the same page on, like, specific religious beliefs and things, when it gets down to nitty-gritty details, so we are all Christian. But we are on the same page when it comes to convergence. Like, none of us have any interest in that. None of us have any interest in even having room for that to happen. Like, for me personally, like, I would not be comfortable even opening up my character to be written by someone else. Like,
Yep.
fan fiction is one thing. I find it flattering, if anything, because I can point to that and go, that is not my character. That is somebody else writing their own version of it, right? Like, it can be safely ignored as not the canon. And I know that canon's a whole can of worms, but I do think it matters, right? But if somebody were to ever, like, buy the rights to Pinkerton's Ghost, even in theory, for them to get Sean, literally it would be something where I would have them, like, sign a thing where it's like, Sean is straight, Sean is Catholic, yeah, Sean, like, these are essential elements of the character. Sean is straight, Sean is Catholic, Sean is anti-abortion, and, like, legitimately, things like that I would mention. Because it's important to me that somebody doesn't try and use my characters as a mouthpiece for things that I think are evil. And I'm not worried about that happening with Pinkerton's Ghost because we, all of us care about the characters. Ben is Ben's baby in a lot of ways, right? Like, and I trust that Ben's not going to let anything happen to these characters.
Yep.
But you have to pay attention. Like, with Star Wars and the extended universe, that's kind of the problem, is that George Lucas never had any clue what he was doing. Depending on when you ask and when you check in with him, he either planned for a 12-movie series, or he planned for 9 movies, or he planned for 1 movie, right? Like, the truth is, he never really decided on what he was going to do or how he was going to do it. He never had a larger plan for Star Wars, right? Like, he did come up with a larger plan at one point that he was never fully decided upon, and that he scrapped. Like, so when he came out with the extended universe, George Lucas really didn't have any quality control in the extended universe, because he had no clue, like, what quality control would have even meant. There was no larger philosophical point to Star Wars. A New Hope and the first 2 in particular, and the third to a lesser extent, films are great movies in their own right, but they were almost great films by accident. Famously, the story is that A New Hope was, like, a complete mess. It was written entirely by Lucas just as basically a pastiche of Flash Gordon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah, he basically just wrote a pastiche of Flash Gordon, and it was a complete mess with terrible dialogue. So a bunch of other writers jumped in, and there were like, I want to say like 3 or 4 different people jumped in and rewrote all of the dialogue in that script, up to and including like on the day of. And miraculously, it turned into something that was very entertaining. And then Empire Strikes Back, they almost accidentally hired one of the best screenwriters in Hollywood to write the first draft of the Empire Strikes Back script. And I'll be fair to Lucas here and say that he absolutely did the right thing. He read the pulp sci-fi stories, he saw an author he liked, and he contacted her. And the person he contacted happened to be Lee Brackett, who was an experienced Hollywood screenwriter with several classics to her name. Yeah. So,
Yep.
even then, though, Empire Strikes Back was kind of an accident, right? She came out with the first draft, and then somebody, I don't think we even know who, came up with this initially, said, you know what would be cool if Darth Vader was Luke's father? And then everybody paused for a moment and said, wait a minute, that's actually a fantastic idea. Like, that adds so much to the story. And then they scribbled it in there. Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that not being. It's hard to imagine now that not being the case. But
Yes
he had
and
no, yeah,
no.
he had no idea in the first movie. He had no idea that that was the direction it was going to go.
Like, yes and no. It's so I was not a Star Wars super fan. I speak positively of the original trilogy, but I came into it as an adult. Like, I first watched them, and I watched them, and I was like, hey, you know what? These movies are pretty good. Was like my reaction. I'm in the case of, if you know the YouTuber ER, he said this himself. I appreciate Star Wars, for capturing something of the value of timelessness in its storytelling, and I respect Star Wars and I enjoy it to an extent, but I'm not a huge fan, right? And watching Empire Strikes Back and also watching Return of the Jedi, it is very obvious to me that Darth Vader was not originally meant to be Luke's father. Now, don't get me wrong, as a twist, it is a brilliant twist, and it's absolutely the right move to include it. But they also had to massage some things, like,
Oh, certainly.
they had to make Obi-Wan a liar, basically, and Lucas chose like the dumbest possible way to do that by having Obi-Wan be like, "Ah, it's true from a certain point
Yeah,
of view."
from a certain point of view.
Yeah, which Obi-Wan obviously just should have said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to tell you," which like would have made much more sense.
Mm.
Uh, but Lucas chose like the dumbest possible way to resolve that. And with that said, though, like Empire Strikes Back again was almost an accidentally great movie. Now, and he got very lucky that the screenwriter that he had for Draft 1 was literally one of the best screenwriters in Hollywood, had written the script to Rio Bravo, had written the script to The Big Sleep, multiple classics under her name, and was an experienced sci-fi writer. So, and credit to Lucas, like, don't get me wrong, he did the right thing. He looked at who would be a good person for this, saw a name in the pulps, and said, I'm going to contact this person. Like, that's what you should do.
And it does take a certain degree of humility that's not always there.
Yeah. Lucas is interesting is that he does not strike me as a particularly prideful person, if that makes sense. Like, there are people like, oh, he had an iron grip over the prequels. The problem with the prequels, though, wasn't that he had this iron grip, it's that he couldn't find anybody else, like, who was
Right.
willing to do it.
If
So
I
he was
recall
forced-
correctly, he did approach Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
who declined.
Yeah, so the prequels, I mean, I both do and don't feel bad for Lucas. Like, every time you say this, you'll always get some smart aleck in the background going like, I wish I could be it. You feel bad for him. I wish I were in his position. And it's like, yeah, okay, I get it, right? He's very rich. But at the same time, I do feel bad for him in the sense that, like, the prequels were very bad movies because he can't write. Like, or at the very least, he can't write dialogue. I think I've always thought that conceptually, the prequels were like perfectly fine. Like, I've seen people say, "Oh, is this even the right story to be told?" I actually don't agree with that as a criticism. I think that the idea behind the prequels is good, and I think that even like the broader story elements of the prequels, if that makes sense, are there. The bones of the prequels work,
Yes.
but the
Yep.
execution was like off to a legendary degree, and that's just because Lucas is not that great of a writer. You know, he wasn't that great of a writer in the original, but he had a bunch of people who stepped in and redid his stuff, you know, and turned what had some genuinely good stuff in there and like turned it into, you know, the Star Wars that we actually came to know and love, right? Like he didn't have that on the prequels. That just wasn't available to him, and they were the result. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think the prequels are bad movies. I've seen people defend them to an extent, but I think that the Red Letter Media reviews are pretty much conclusive as proof. Like I I think that Red Letter Media pretty much has established, right? Like objectively speaking, the movies are not good. Yeah. But with that said, like when people
You can
go, you know,
understand perhaps people's nostalgia for it in
yes,
retrospect.
exactly. I understand the nostalgia. There is definitely like he was trying on the prequels
He did not
in a
hate his
way that
customers.
what was that?
He
Yes.
did not hate his customers.
Yeah, exactly. In a way that the Disney sequel movies, like they were not trying. They were trying to make a quick buck, and then they got in. You know, let's not even get into like the Last Jedi. He wasn't. He just hated Star Wars. You know, he hated the franchise, and he was actively trying to destroy it. Uh, like, and I genuinely believe that.
Oh,
At,
he's too
at
good
the
a
very
he's too
least,
good a writer. I
yeah.
have back many years ago. I got as a birthday present a collection of short stories in an anthology called The Time Traveler's Almanac, and there was an introduction written to this anthology. And who reads introductions to anthologies? Nobody reads those. Nobody cares about them. For some reason, I happened to glance at this one, and it caught my eye. It was a really good. It was a surprisingly good introduction. I remembered it years later. I went back to look to see which author wrote that, and it turned out to be Ryan Johnson.
Yeah, he wrote Looper, which I've heard people
Yeah,
say is a very good
he is
movie.
he is totally capable of writing good things. He knows how to write good things. It's
Yep.
yeah. So the fact that this was as bad as it was, uh, there is no way that that's an accident.
Yep.
Yeah, it's go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It was on purpose. I don't want us to spend too much time on Star Wars because we know, but I can bring it back from downtown, all the way back to what we're talking about with the SCP Foundation.
Excellent.
Part of the thing that that we've been talking about the entire time here is quality control. They let Rian Johnson in for reasons I don't understand. I don't think anyone understands, unless there was an actual maliciousness on the part of Kathleen Kennedy. And like,
If I had to guess, it was because of Looper, and they thought that he was just like, oh, he's an experienced sci-fi director,
yeah,
and
but
then
Looper was like 15 years ago.
sure, but if J.J. Abrams, if for whatever reason they didn't want Abrams to do the sequel, and I could understand that because the first movie's not that great. But if for whatever reason they didn't want Abrams to do the sequel, and you're looking for a guy to do the sequel, I feel like Johnson would, if you don't know who the guy, like he's just a straightforwardly like I can imagine a studio exec bringing up his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about Ryan Johnson? He did Looper. That was good.
Okay.
It had such a downstream effect, um, that the latest Scream movie had Ryan Johnson as the villain, and I don't mean Ryan Johnson playing a character. I mean the the cause of all the problems in the entire movie, the cause of all the villains, the inspiration, the thing that got the ball rolling, was movie director Ryan Johnson. Uh,
That's amazing.
yes, it. there's no. I think even in Hollywood, even people who like what he did know that he did it deliberately.
Yeah.
But
I
I'll let Ben bring it back as he was trying to.
so uh So, and part of it is that one of the things I've done is I've checked whether or not for Pinkerton's Ghosts, whether or not the short story writer I'm going to bring in will be malicious to the canon and the ideas of Pinkerton's Ghosts. But the thing is that they didn't do that in Star Wars because Rian Johnson is on the record as director saying I want to tear down Star Wars. They didn't, and they haven't done it for the SCP Foundation. But the difference is that the difference between what Rian Johnson is and Convergence is that the people working on it do not always understand what they are doing. Now, that doesn't mean that they always don't understand what they are doing, but due to how they interact, they certainly do not put the mind, the presence of mind into it to do anything but destroy what they touch. Anthony and I were discussing Lackadaisy Cats. Apparently, the voice of a female character is a dude. I thought it was just, a black woman they had hired on. No. Uh, Dude in a dress. Uh, the Lackadaisy author is not necessarily friendly to Convergence, but her voice acting talent getter certainly is. And it doesn't destroy the story, but it does taint what it is. They made a choice not based on voice acting, but based on a certain amount of politics. I haven't heard anything about it because I stay away from production drama, but I bet they've promoted it based on that. I bet somewhere, some way, somehow, somebody's like, you should watch this because they have a dude in a dress doing one of the women's voice acting roles. But then someone will go, well, it's a show about cats. Why do you care? Because it's an example of everything that I've been talking about. In the
There's
same.
been in all kinds of stuff. You have people voicing the opposite sex all the time.
Yep.
Granny Goodness in the DC animated universe was famously voiced by not just anybody, but the extremely deep voiced Ed Asner,
Oh, I
and it
remember
worked.
that. That was pretty
It,
great.
it yeah, it worked, but there was nothing political about it. It was an artistic choice to make the character seem really creepy.
Yep. There's a character in English sort of pantomime called Dame Edna, and the gag is always that it's just a dude, and he's your great aunt Edna, and he's about to tell you, a story, and it goes like this, puppets. Today we are going for Peter and the Wolf. Oh, it's a wonder. Like it's one of those things where it's a character, it's a specific
Right.
thing. Um, but people can't separate that out anymore between a pantomime dame, as it's called, and the mental illness, and they can't understand why it's important to point that out. Whether or not this person is psychotic or not psychotic, this person uh, now believes that they are validated. He believes that he is validated, excuse me, in his persona and all his stuff, that he's doing here. The same way with SCP Foundation, there is quite a bit of that sort of malarkey in, especially like late middle to current SCP Foundation. Now, I'm not going to say it's all over the place. In fact, because there's literally 8,000 plus articles for you to read, you might not even come across it for a good 100, 500 articles. wiki walks are a thing. But you will come up against it, and you'll also see in many of its symbols the trans flag or the gay flag or whatever flag that they're flying today. Gotta support the non anomalous country of Ukraine. Certainly don't look into the Donbass from 2013 to 2022. There were no bombings in Bossing Say, etc., etc., etc. And you look at this stuff, and your choice is to give in to the madness or to reject it, because it's always going to poke at your mind stem. It is a meme, in fact, that you cannot forget. You must notice it. And it's very bothersome, because what happens is that, instead of enjoying something, you're forced into seeing somebody's politics. And I don't mean, like there's some right wing stuff, there's some vaguely right wing stuff under the libertarian bent, like Freehold by Michael Z. Williamson, who I have met, and he's very friendly in person. So to be clear here, I'm not throwing shade on him, but his work is a very clear libertarian fantasy. And I read the first couple, complete with like, oh yeah, you can prostitute yourself at will, everyone's having sex, blah, blah, blah. And then he throws it all away by number 3, and it's like, buddy, why? Like, the only reason your stories had value more than any generic sci-fi series is because you had specific rules that you went for. And also, the 4th book was badly written. Like, I was stuck with it on a plane, and I'm like, 8-hour plane ride to England. Fortunately, I had others on my Kindle, but I was unhappy. So like it's like that. If people can get it, like the reason why we always go on and on and on about this isn't because it's a broken record. It's because I meet people every day who don't get it, or maybe they do and they'll make a joke about he she, and then they'll move on with their lives and still go to the same thing and still spend their money on the same thing because they don't get the mental connection. And it's also go for it.
Oh, it should be noted that insofar as there was a deliberate decision towards convergence, we can actually trace it to a specific decision, and that was during a June, they were going to replace site-wide the SCP Foundation logo with a version of the SCP Foundation logo with the rainbow flag.
Yep.
And this was done as a political statement, and they specifically said that the site came from 4chan, and so there was a lot in the early days that was not politically correct, and there were a lot of the older editors that were not politically correct, because the politically correct people weren't necessarily browsing 4chan at the time.
Yep.
And so they did this logo specifically so that anybody who objected could be kind of forced off the site, or at the very least anybody who objected. Well, now we know the kind of person who objects, and now we know who we have to push off the site. And it worked. There were some post-mortem articles written in the SCP Foundation, in the blog or forum. I forget exactly how it's what they call it, but where people were celebrating the fact that this is what they did, and this is how they were able to reclaim, as they thought, the tenor of the site.
They never had lost it either. Like it's like they're delusional. Like it's like I try to I talk to my mom about this because I love her and she loves me, and I try to explain to her that these people who are like making Emma Black in the next BBC production or whatever hate her. They hate her. They are an uttermost enemy. Like, even though we are called to love our enemies, Jesus Christ has very specific words to say to people who harm children. All right? Their end goal is to harm children. They want your children, your children, to be like them. I had a coworker who was like, my son came to me, and he's like, hey, I think and his son's like 13 or something. I think I'm bisexual. And I'm like, the teacher's in on that. He's like, yeah. So what I told him is, so you like dick, right? You're and I could believe this guy said this to his son, by the way. Pardon my language. I should have said that ahead of time. So you want to, and he basically made it's like, so you're gay? No, I'm not gay. I just so you don't want to, no, and of course, by the end of the week, he's like, yeah, he's straight again. Uh, it's like that it's like it's horrible, and the common man does it again. But that's everyone. Like some dude in Podunk, Missouri, is dealing with his son, thinking he's bisexual, and of course his son is nothing of the same. He's seen some TikTok videos, and he even said it in the father's conversation with me. He said, there's probably some cute girl who thinks like this. This is what it is. I know what it is. I was like this when I was, it's one of those things. Like it was easily solved. But this is the middle of Missouri. The guy's not a Christian, but at the same time, there's no place they're not reaching out to.
Well, because middle of Missouri has internet access.
Unfortunately,
the middle of Missouri is not cut off from the rest of the noosphere, as the foundation would put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, containment is difficult, I think, in this case. Or if it was an SCP, it'd be one of those weird new. There's a classification they invented called Archon, for ones that we have deliberately decided not to contain. This would be that, except that would require looking at it as anomalous in the first place.
Yeah. And there's especially with things like Archon added to it, it's like, no, not everything's Archon. You have God the Father in a cell somewhere, and you guys are worrying about whether or not the gay gene is an Archon. I don't think we're fighting on the same side.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well.
There's a few. I have to admit, there was one SCP-001 proposal that dealt with theology, that had the I think the Division of Tactical Theology, and it's the title of it is God's Blind Spot, and the idea is that in the book of Exodus, at one point, Moses had refused to circumcise his son, and this was despite the fact that Moses was told by the Lord to do it and to pass this on as the law for the Jews. And so in Exodus there's a section, and it came to pass by way of the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah, the wife of Moses, took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me." And the normal interpretation of this verse is that God's prophets are not immune to the laws that they are told to give to everyone else.
Yes.
And this is an important thing. A lot of cults would not get off the ground if only people read this particular passage. But the SCP interpretation is that the Lord met Moses and sought to kill him and didn't. And most people interpret that as, this means that the Lord started to kill him, maybe a fast-acting disease or something of that nature. But no, SCP says that God is omnipotent and omnipresent and omnibenevolent, except in this one inn in particular. And so naturally the ethics committee has moved into this inn after they found it and unearthed it where it is in the Middle East.
Right, of course.
Because much of the stuff that the ethics committee gets up to would indeed result in divine smiting if it were found out about. And there's various communications with the Lord about the various points of understanding. The counterparty shall not smite, strike down, or otherwise enact wrath upon any of the Foundation personnel named on Exhibit A without at least 90 days written notice and an opportunity to cure the transgression. It's a great...
That's kind of amazing, actually.
It's a great thing.
Yeah. That reminds me of the satanic contract one, where it's like, yes, we spent 3 days and one of our lawyers died of dehydration, but we almost have the word "the" defined for a deal with the devil, and it's like, all right, that's actually pretty great. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's a good concept for an idea. It's not one I would be comfortable including in a story because, it's blasphemous. But I mean, it is fiction, so I use blasphemous, more colloquial terms.
About the God in the end,
I wouldn't
right?
include it, but I like the concept.
I will say, anybody listening to this, if you want the best example of a deal with the devil in fiction, go look up John C. Wright's short story, The Fate of Fortune. It is a lawyer trying to make a deal with the devil and trying to use precise wording to win, and it's written by a lawyer. It is excellent. So, tangent aside.
I just looked this up.
Excellent. Yeah, it is. There are definitely things here that would be blasphemy. I like the in because at least if it's blasphemy, it's a new one. It's not a heresy I don't think I've ever heard before. There is another one, and I know Ben, I know you know this, Anthony. I'm not sure if you've seen it. One of the original 001 proposals was the angel guarding the Garden of Eden, and that one I don't think that's even blasphemous. I can't think of anything theologically wrong with it. It's just a description of a giant angel and an explanation of we're not exactly sure how to contain this aside from making sure nobody ever gets near.
Yep. And that's not too bad, quite frankly. But it's, like there's so much to it that like it's hard to see it because it's like now we're getting on to good stuff like obviously I described my love for the Skull of the White Div. That's a good one. A lot of the Cain and Abel ones are good. Them trying to kill the hard to kill reptiles, very good, which is absolutely hilarious because they have all these things where it's like they threw it into a portal to another dimension and then it comes back with wings and a note that says, "Ha, it's your problem now, losers." So it's like basically every Foundation shuffled their hard to kill reptile one reality over at the same time. And this one has wings, so it's horrible. They nuked it. It's bathed in acid. They send in the kid that forces everyone to destroy themselves while trying to kill it. And instead they're friends. Like it's got all these great stuff. You have horrible. Go for it.
One of my favorite instances in that article. There's an SCP-826, which takes a given room and turns that room into a room from a story. And so one of the researchers wrote a story called "The Generally Nice, Friendly Thing That Can and Will Kill SCP-682 Permanently If It So Much as Spots That Lizard," and puts that in the thing that turns the room into fiction and puts 682 into that room. And when they finally recovered it, the story had grown over 200 pages long, and the title had changed to "The Generally Nice, Friendly Thing That Tried to Kill SCP-682 Permanently But Failed." And the room had become this huge pastoral battleground. It was very just having and this is where oversight, I think, helps. Nobody on the site would allow you to actually kill 682. It's too good a gag. It's an immovable object that you can't throw any of your other unstoppable forces against. If somebody managed to kill it, I mean, I could write a little thing right now saying, "Oh yeah, I have this awesome SCP that killed it," it would take away from the site.
Yep.
And I think people would know that, and I think to the extent that people know that, there is still oversight on quality control.
Yep.
There's also a one of the later ones was also written for a contest to write an SCP in as few words as possible. It's a metaphysical pointer, and you can take things that are outside and put them inside, and you can redefine what outside and inside are with this SCP.
Yeah, that's pretty
And
cool.
one of the testing logs was obviously they tried this on SCP-682. And the testing logs just says SCP-682 went inside. 682 went inside. Went inside. Went inside. And then at the end, SCP-682 outside. And at that point, they stopped trying. Even this thing, yeah, it can't. Nothing works on this thing forever, and that's where the fun of it is.
Yep. And that's kind of the joy of it. Like, I like to think great, like, the characters are fine in Finger and his Ghost and stuff like that. But I think a lot of it is the fun of watching, Jim Donovan's weird magic stuff, Sean Russo, how his adventures and dramas play out, or Jack Morrow just trying to kill whatever's in front of him. I do try to think up unique ways to do it. Like, there's this giant crow assassin sent by the Grand Masons to eat loose ends. And Jack harpoons it, ties it in the trunk of his car, and road rashes it to death, dragging it around the backwoods Arkansas. That was. I think that's a pretty top 10. And another one, Jack Morrow beats a monster to death in the memory of somebody's wedding, with his grandfather's 1911. Like he got things like that would make things fun, keep it fresh. And with the oversight, with other things that are available, it can make things better than a lot of people kind of understand. Because if they thought that a lot of this stuff, how do I want to put it? Like, a lot of this stuff just comes out of nowhere. It's like, no, you have to inculcate it. You have to let it percolate a little bit. You know what I mean? You have to kind of let it rise in the oven of love, and so on and so forth. But you have to manage it. And I think not a lot of people are up to the same task as they were before. Like, if the SCP Foundation had existed now and was, in the hundreds, I am absolutely of the belief that it would never get off the ground.
Really?
Yep.
What do you think would happen to it?
It would be converged instantly and destroyed.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this as like an insult, like the creators can't have, done anything or whatever. But the thing is that it was a special thing of the internet that came up, and it doesn't have the same push as it did before. Megabuster Shipper says, hello. The Horizon Initiative is based. That's their religious setup organization. But it's like with the other things like the Magnus Archives and Welcome to Night Vale, weird fiction, fantastic horror in some places. The Magnus Archives is absolutely fantastic sometimes. But then everyone's gay, or they have a diverse cast for no reason. Or they just kind of lose the plot in a lot of different places. And whole episodes are about the narrator of Night Vale's love of Carlos. And at first, it's quite funny. He's obsessed
because
with...
it's just part of the general Night Vale bizarreness.
Yeah, like he's looking at Carlos. Oh, It's Carlos, beautiful Carlos with the perfect skin. Oh, how I wish the skin was mine, mine to touch and to hold and to wear. Oh, beautiful Carlos. Wonderful. Yes, Carlos. And then Carlos is like, you guys are all going to die if we don't leave now. And it's like, oh, Carlos, speaking words of wisdom, please keep talking. We love hearing your voice, Carlos. Like, it's funny because the narrator himself is a character in Night Vale. He is not some unmoved observer. You know, he is as weird as everyone else. You
And
know. Mm?
there was in Night Vale, there's a character named Steve Carlsberg,
Yes.
who the uh, who the narrator Cecil Palmer hates for reasons that are never fully explained. But every time Steve Carlsberg comes up, oh, I hate that guy. And it turns out that Steve Carlsberg is, as far as I'm aware, the only person in Night Vale mentioned to be a male with a wife and child. I
I didn't know that.
and yeah, well, it's at least as of when I stopped listening, that was the case, and it kind of worked in that you have this outcast, and the outcast is, so far as everybody can tell, the most normal person in the entire town. Uh, there's a running gag on Night Vale that they have. It's a variety show in one sense. They have indie music, one song per episode.
Yes.
But introducing the music, uh, Cecil will say something like, "And now, the weather," and then the music will play rather than the weather report.
Waiting for
Steve
the bus in
Carlsberg
the
is the only
rain,
one
in the
immune to
rain.
this.
Waiting
At
for
one
the
point,
bus
we
in the
have an
rain.
episode that he is partially narrating, and he at one point mentioned, "Yes, I think we were talking about the weather." You hear the first couple bars of a song, and then he interrupts. "Yes, it was definitely the weather. We had to stand around for several minutes and listen while the music was playing." I liked the fact that you have this normal person treated as this bizarre and hateable guy because the rest of the town is so weird.
Right.
It worked, but there's only so far you can take that gag before it stops working, and I highly doubt that that was intentional. I
Yeah.
highly doubt that any positive thing was meant there.
Yep. No argument from me. Oh well. And that's something to consider too. Like Anthony mentioned that, you know, if anyone would to say, you know, like if some Hollywood producer kicks down my door, hey man, I'll give you, you know, $10 million for this idea. Okay, well, you know, please meet our lawyer, Pittance Saint Devay. Don't mind the circle that he's walking in and can't seem to leave. That's just for your protection and mine. Now, let's begin the contract negotiations. If you would prick your thumb, we only do blood oaths here. I'm sure you're very familiar with these. You know, like it's one of those things where it's like, oh no, dude, like you don't just get to, you know, do whatever you want with it. People look at some of the stuff as like it's the highest honor to be paid an immense sum of money for your idea. It's like no, they ruined the Dresden Files with their show, which was kind of terrible. It was just a generic Magic Dude show with the Dresden Files cast. They're going to ruin Monster Hunter, and they're going to ruin whatever Robert Fox's IP is. I can't remember the name of it offhand. Um, you know, and they're just not going to treat it right. Uh,
It's a shame because I really like Paul Blackthorne, but he was not tall enough to play Harry Dresden.
uh, then you have things like, you know, SCP Foundation, which is impossible to put into a movie with any sort of coherence and barely works as a book series, and only by somebody who is quite, you know, familiar with them. You know, there's there's no way in any hell on earth or heaven that this stuff will make it out unscathed. Uh, you know, there's like part of the problem with right wingers, and maybe this has gone on too long, too many people complaining about it, but they don't like get art. Like this is a new problem for right wingers, by the way. I view it as a new problem because every medieval lord understood art, every Borgia with a mistress understood art, every Roman senator knew how important it was to get his fat head on a statue. Every Persian king knew he had to make temples beautiful or the gods will smite him. Like it's very clear that people who would be called on the right wing side of history understood, at least for their translated existence. I don't think left or right would be even translatable to a Persian or a Babylonian, though. There is a clear thread of art, and it was not always the domain of leftists. You had many, many right wing artists, or at least artists who were like, no, I don't think you should bum men behind the bar just because you can. Like it's not something that's kosher here. They don't have to be Tolkien. You have men like Maupassant who was all over the place morally, but he never could be accused, like at least for all the things I've read of him, he never could be accused of being a communist, or communard rather. And part of it is that like our culture is downstream from law, yeah, but also culture is downstream from art, and it is the domain of the enemy. It's why it's important to support things like Castalia House, Pinkerton's Ghosts, whatever John C. Wright and Jaji Wright are up to. I think, Jaji Wright is about to release the 6th book of The Unexpected Enlightenment of Rachel Griffin sometime in the future. Relatively soon future. Supporting, all these different authors that we mentioned. Larry Correa, for all, his jerk-ass stuff he says sometimes, he's still very much worthy of being supported. Same with Robert Fox and Richard Fox and Nick Cole especially. It's we can't do it without a certain amount of unity of spirit. Even though I am as anti-Catholic as you can get without being on the atheist or agnostic or Gnostic spectrum, I absolutely believe we're not going to win this war without a certain amount of ecumenical elbow rubbing. And may my pastor forgive me for saying ecumenical.
It's a polite way of putting it.
It's very polite. Thank you for noticing. Anthony, you've been quiet for a bit. What do you got to say?
Not all that much, except like co-sign, which is why I've been quiet for a bit. Yeah,
Silence is consent. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of how I would discuss ecumenism in this sense. So, ecumenism, you gotta understand, like, the circles that I am in, just as you are in some ways like the least anti-Catholic of, the evangelical Baptists, I am in some ways the least anti-Protestant of the circles that I sometimes run in. Like, there is a strain of traditionalist Catholicism that is incredibly anti-Protestant. I do not identify myself with them. I will put it that way. How about I put it like this? There is literally a strain of Catholicism that does not believe in ecumenism at all. Like, that thinks that ecumenism is a mistake and it was wrong for us to even approach, like, the outside world with that mindset. I don't agree with that. So, when it comes to ecumenism, I am in the circumstance where I am a Catholic. So, in theory, right, I think that everybody should just be Catholic. But putting it that way, like, it's not that simple. I don't think that every Protestant should immediately walk off and join the Catholic Church right now without being convinced of,
Mm.
like, if you don't think that the Catholic Church is what it claims to be, then you shouldn't just pretend to be Catholic. Like, LARPing as a Catholic isn't going to help you.
And there's
Right?
a lot of
It's not
that.
going to help anyone. Uh, LARPing as anything isn't going to help you. Like, there is a certain point, like, I agree, atheists should go to church, but atheists should go to church because they're trying to find something genuine there. Like, they shouldn't just go to church to go to church, Like, you should go to church if you realize there's something missing in your life and you want to see what's up and whatever, right? You
Yep.
shouldn't go to church if you're just like, I'm going to church because, why not? And I don't think anybody is, but it's the same with Catholicism. Like, I've heard people go, like, I have had discussions with people who communication with Protestants literally amounts to just go to Mass, get the sacraments, and then you'll become Catholic. And I'm like, that's not how that works. I don't agree with that.
Yep.
And also, that's a misunderstanding of how the sacraments are supposed to work. They're not magic. Like, if you go and receive a sacrament and you don't believe in it and you don't think it will work, like, what are you even doing? Like, it's not a magic spell. So when it comes to the allies that we need to make with the Protestant culture, I do think that there is an extent where we need to accept that these groups, as much as we, you'd say in an ideal world, we would have unity. These groups are not going away. They're made up of intelligent people who can articulate why they are Protestant, like you, right?
Yep.
And who have no interest in becoming Catholic, but at the same time do agree with, like, they do agree with us on a lot of different things, and can be allies in these things. Jesus Christ said, if you're doing things in my name, then you're not against me, you're with me, right? Like,
Yep.
I don't think that should be taken as a blanket thing where, all you have to do is do anything in Jesus' name that immediately means you're free from all
especially
criticism.
because the second commandment forbids using that name in vain.
Right. Like, I don't think, like, using Christ's name to do good works is an immediate thing where it says, like, well, that means all criticism is done and we should just be okay with everyone as they are. But it does mean that we can work together on things without compromising ourselves.
Yep.
So that is my long way of saying that from my perspective, I think that Catholics and Protestants can work together in the culture without immediately trying to convert the other. Like,
Yep.
hopefully that made sense.
It does. Recently,
There's a time and place, I guess, is how I would summarize it.
yeah. And like a lot of my quote unquote beef with Catholics is just running into, no, we don't believe in this. And it's like, look, there's somebody right there saying it. They're saying that works get you into heaven. Could you please, like, gang up on them instead of the Protestants who believe in the blood of Jesus Christ saving them, which you also believe in? No, you're wrong because there's context you don't know. And it's like, oh, please. And I don't mean it like, as a criticism of Anthony or Catholicism. I'm just saying, if you ever see me get into a fight with a Catholic, it's probably because another Catholic, and I do this to Protestants all the time too, has said, something like works get you into heaven. You're not saved unless you take the Pope's leadership. Things that are outright heretical and criticized by wise Catholics.
Well, this was a conversation that I had, like, in a Catholic forum I'm on. A Protestant showed up. This was an apologetics forum. Now, they showed up. I disagreed with this approach. I'm going to be cagey because I like a lot of the people there, including the person who brought this guy in. I think that this person does a lot of good work. and they're my friend, right? So
Mm.
I don't mean to use this to like completely bash this person, but I didn't agree with the approach, and I still don't. And what they did was like they met a Protestant who was at least somewhat educated. I think like in a conversation with him later, like he said that he had started going to like a Bible study a year ago and was attending a Bible believing church, which I actually knew of. Like I had visited it before. Uh, so she had invited him onto the Catholic forum, was basically like bombarding him with stuff and asked me to get involved. And I did, like talk with him a bit, and then I messaged him privately and said, I'm running a Bible study, you could join. And he made a comment where he asked me if I would go to the Bible study at his church, and I said, I actually appreciate the author. I said, but respectfully on two levels. First, I literally can't. I don't have time. Like my Bible study's online. I run it, you know. Uh, and second of all, my problem with it is that like I know it's like you linked to me videos by Mike Winger. I know who Mike Winger is. I have watched like the videos you've linked. I've watched a lot of them. You know, it's like I do know it, and he's like, okay, but how do you think I feel that like I was just ganged up on by all of these Catholics? And I said, you know what? I know, like that's a good point. I wouldn't have done that, and I'm sorry. Like they go, yeah, but in that conversation she had said like go and get the sacraments. It's like, and she said, and I said whoa, like I don't think you should be telling him to get the sacraments before he has actually said that he even believes in what they do or what they are. Like that's it's like for one thing they don't. I said they're not magic, and she actually said like yes they are magic, and I sort of got her point. Like they distribute grace, but I'm like no, we need to be very specific with our terms because I know if you say
Mm-hmm.
this Protestants, they'll be like, oh, so Catholics do believe in magic, right? It's like they
Yes.
absolutely don't. And I linked the catechism. This was in the thread, by the way. Like the Protestant was reading this discussion. I linked the catechism that said like we absolutely reject magic. It's like the sacraments are not magic. You need to be careful with how you word things. Like so, this is a long way of saying that I know what you mean. Like and I will say too that sometimes Catholics just speak here. Like I don't think this person actually believed that they function in the same way as magic spells. I think they were being rhetorical and they went too far. But if you say that, then a Protestant can say, look, this Catholic just said that they believe that the sacraments are magic, which is literally a common Protestant criticism. And that's why I'm like, you can't say that. Yeah, like you absolutely cannot say that. You need to be very specific with your terms. Magic is rejected. We don't believe in magic.
And and you wonder why why we end up having to have things like the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It's because otherwise dealing with this sort of divarication is very, very difficult.
Yep. And I'll freely admit, part of the problem with Protestants is that there's no office of inquisition, almost by definition, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a whole lot of baggage that comes with that. That sadly, there's just no answer to. Um, especially for your average, um, Joel Osteen type, who we have roasted in this very live stream several times. And there's and a lot of this, why this sort of flows from it flows from the SCP Foundation, is because the enemy can certainly provide the unity that Christians need to have. Also, Megabuster Shepherd, post as much as you want, baby. Mwah. They have a certain amount of unity that they certainly can always rely on. Hell is one kingdom. Um, the earth is not so lucky. Uh, and these people, they gang up and defend each other. They make sure that wrongthink is destroyed. That's the reason why convergence just can't be rooted out in the same, at least late convergence, like SCP Foundation stuff, just can't be rooted out. And then you combine it with people who actually can write well, and you get some stuff that has more longevity than it should. Night Vale lasted a very long time before the cracks started to show. Magnus Archives the same way. and it's usually around the same time as the gay reveal, though Night Vale lasted way longer than that.
Yeah,
Um,
Night Vale, it was close to the first episode, but they lasted. I think I I would argue they lasted 2 seasons, which equated to I think 3.5 years. There were a lot of good episodes. I was surprised at how long it took.
they still have quite a bit going on. For example, there was a series of shows about like him bringing back Carlos to the real world from an alternate dimension, and they have Scruff McGruff, the crime dog, as Barks Ennui, who is constantly reminding people that the world is gonna end if they don't send back Carlos. Like, all right, that's brilliant. All right, that's brilliant. I can't argue against it. Good job, whoever wrote that. That's a 10 out of 10. You know, uh, but it's with a lot of this stuff. Like for me, I'd be pretty happy if the Catholics self-policed more. Just like I know the Catholics would be happy if the Protestants self-policed more. And even though it doesn't look like that online, we do. The Orthodox do not self police for reasons I do not understand. I'm sure they would describe it as the Lord works in mysterious ways. But like,
Historical reasons.
yep. But there's also like Fuentes Catboy, Catholicism. Nick Fuentes should not have gotten as big as he did in Catholic circles. He should not have. He was always degenerate. He smelled of degeneracy. He cut a good look in a suit. Was never a fan of him. I've never listened to the show. All right, and I've listened to Catholics. I'm a big fan of David Arini. He's been on this show. Love him to death. He's my Christian brother. The but the but the sort of degeneracy that was promoted and is now being revealed as a straight up grooming gang, you know, says to me that, like, I can usually tell whether a Protestant's bad just by the fact that they treat it like a family business. And I'm not talking about the son went through his proper steps, got his masters of divinity and all the things you can think of. But I'm talking about, like, yeah, I went in because it's the family business. It's like, no, no, that's not why you do anything spiritual. You do things spiritual because God leads you to it. Just like Satan is leading these people to deeper and deeper degeneracies that cause so much shame that half of them kill themselves. Like it's an absolutely heartbreaking thing that the only answer is to burn it out, but we don't have the tools yet. Hmm.
Yeah, I've never watched Fuentes. Never cared about Fuentes. Uh, I vaguely remember Ryan Niemeyer writing something about like that the Brokers were doing some stuff protecting churches, but like I don't know a thing about him.
Yeah, and some Groypers have, to be fair to them, um, I don't want to say that they've been all bad, but there's a lot there that you know can't can't really be ignored, and continually uh, and just continually shows up again and again and again. And after Nick Fuentes, disappears, there'll be somebody else. Who knows who? I don't know. You know, and Kanye and Milo and all those jazz never seem to get out of the horrible mosh pit that they're in. Who knows what? Um, just like the SCP Foundation will eventually get worse and worse and worse if they don't keep a strong hand on it, just like Magnus Archives got worse and worse. And the SCP Foundation has lasted a long time, partially because they have an editor board that has stayed mostly consistent throughout the entire time and will, like, rein back the worst of it. But it's all there. The corruption's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a big, and I didn't want to get too far into this because this involves details that this involves a lot of details about specific people, but there was a scandal a couple years back. A number of the editors, um, a number of the established editors, ended up being banned from the site because of inappropriate things that they were discussing with minors and inappropriate pictures being shared with minors on some of the IRC chats and Discord logs
Classic.
and so forth. Um, Actually, I think it was just IRC. I think they set up IRC in the very early days. I don't think they ever moved to Discord. And
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of the details, but I do know that this is the public reason that was given. And I know that some of the names were names that I immediately recognized, and Ben, you would probably immediately recognize as well. And yeah, when you, it, I don't see how you, yeah, fundamentally something like the SCP Foundation, something like this massive collaborative work of fiction. I just don't see how you could keep it, how you could keep a handle on that sort of thing. Uh, I don't without direct oversight, without somebody being in charge, without there being some specific person who says the buck stops here. Uh, I don't see how you get to the point where nobody's abusing power.
Yep.
Because, well, I might not abuse power, but then again, I can't stop someone else from doing it because I don't have any authority to do it.
Yep.
That's why I mentioned the thing with the administrator at the very beginning. I am amazed in hindsight that didn't get to his head. But it didn't. And we only found out years later because he had cancer. Well, wasn't sure he was going to even survive it necessarily, but decided to give an interview just to satisfy people's curiosity. But this was long after he'd stopped writing, and he hasn't written anything since, so it's still not. It's not abusing. It's not abusing that power, but we see that people have abused the power, and
Yep.
And it's a real shame, and I don't think that that's unconnected to the convergence, and I don't think that either doing the inappropriate things and convergence. I don't think either of those things are unconnected to the quality going down.
Yep.
When the priority shifts away from telling the best possible stories, that's what you're going to get.
Yep. No argument. No argument from me. Well, that's a pretty good setup for a lot of the stuff we have here. Uh, Harry, would you like to give us any? Actually, I'll start with Anthony. Do you have any final words for us?
Nope.
I'm going to go through the chats real quick. Megabuster Shepard, being an absolute king, takes on Magic the Gathering players in a new episode. If he can overcome the sweaty smells. You might be a prot, but you're our prot. Yes, sadly. Christians on the internet like to have the same 5 arguments all the time. Ortho bros are busy arguing about calendars. Yep. The RCP authority should have been a fresh start. Alas, it died young. I'm not sure about the RCP authority. If anything that we can learn from the SCP Foundation.
RCP authority, I thought it was still going.
I don't even like it. Doesn't fire any neurons for me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
If anything we can learn from the SCP Foundation and other collabs is that you have to have rules and you have to have gatekeeps. That's a pretty good summary.
Yeah.
Harry, do you have any last words for us?
I would say what got us started on this was Ben Wheeler and I on Zachlog the Great's podcast talking about the book There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. I would recommend that. I would recommend that book because I think that represents the sort of the best aspect of SCP. It's written by a single author, so you don't have a lot of the problems we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it portrays an SCP Foundation that fundamentally has humanity's best interests at heart. And I think it's worth reading. And if somehow you've gotten through this entire 2-hour podcast and never checked out the site, I do recommend the site. I do recommend the first 1,000 articles. It is entirely possible to lose hours or days on it, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there, and I think it's worth reading.
Yep, I agree. It's certainly enjoyable, and quite frankly, for our problems, we have, like I've said throughout this, there's quality there that we can certainly enjoy. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Hari Seldon, for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Perhaps we'll have you on again sometime in the far future when we have something else to talk as deeply about. Perhaps the end of the world. We will discussing how the convergence of the SCP Foundation let Apophis eat the sun.
We'll want that retrospective, yes.
Absolutely, it's been a good run, and quite frankly, we blame the gays. Thank you all for joining us. Hope you enjoy it. Come back next week when we might do something. I don't know, Anthony. We'll figure something out between the two of us. Have a good night.
Woohoo.